My name is Chris Craig. I'm an IRS Enrolled Agent. I'm licensed to practice before the Internal Revenue Service. I have a law degree. I got my Master's of Law in Taxation. I also have an MBA. And I took this 4,000-hour certification course that makes me basically an insolvency and restructuring advisor. What does that mean? Not a whole lot. But I help companies that are in distress, and I turn them around. Kind of like a business coach in a way, but on the financial side. So generally they hit Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then we reorganize the company, they come out of bankruptcy, make a lot of money, or they end up back in bankruptcy and you had to liquidate the company. So that's what a CIRA is. I'm just an everyday average Joe shit the rag man. Got out of high school, went in the Marine Corps, served my 4 years, did a few years in the reserves, and punched the clock in a W-2 for a couple of years. In fact, the very first job I got out of the Marine Corps, really I was gonna be a cop like some of you, because that's kind of your natural progression. I was a field wireman, so in communications, basically, a telephone guy. So I went to work for Pacific Bell. 25 bucks an hour at 22 years old getting out, that was a pretty good wage. That was almost 30 years ago, okay? I got fired from that job. Didn't last but 8 months. Why? Well, I think it's the Marine mentality. I'm gonna adapt and overcome. Don't tell me to do something I can't do. Don't figure it out. I remember I was in South San Francisco. My boss said, hey, I want you to climb this pole and I want you to splice this 2,000 pair cable. I have a bucket truck. I have tools. I'm not gonna stand on a pole with rain going sideways and get soaking wet and my feet are gonna hurt. So I used my bucket truck, went through the mud, finished the job, but on the way out I got stuck. So there I see a tractor off to the side. I wave this backhoe driver, hey man, can you come get me unstuck? Well, when he come and got me unstuck, there was a lot of damage to the front bumper because we've tied a chain around it. And this is an old truck. It's not like it meant a lot to the phone company, but I was able to still drive it back. So next morning they said, why is there all this damage to the truck? I said, well, it got stuck and I had to get it pulled out. What's the big deal? Suspended for like 3 weeks. So I went up to Oregon where my mom was living. And at the end of the day, they said, hey, come back here, we want to talk to you. Now, I'm in a union. Union's supposed to protect hard workers, right? But I'll tell you, the union is really for the lazy. I'm sorry if some of you guys in the union, but it protects the damn lazy. They didn't like the fact that I would complete 8 trouble tickets a day when the norm was like 3 to 4, extend them out so you could get more overtime. I'm a worker. I like to get shit done. So they called me back to Oregon just to tell me, you're fired. Dude, you could have told me that over the phone. Instead, you're fired, here's your last check type scenario. Okay, so then I went to work for GTE when that was around. I think Verizon brought GTE, so I worked for the phone company up there. So I went through the whole .com era. Telecommunications was like prior to 2000. I think it was good that I got fired because the next job I got paid me double what I was doing before. And I had never had a job more than like 8 months at a time. Next company would hire you, more stock options. And that was kind of the wave from the late 90s through like 2000. And then in 2000, I was laid off. All these companies filed bankruptcy. I had to figure it out. So a friend of mine by the name of Doug McCabe, I don't know if he's in one of these pictures here, but he said, hey, I need a database built. I said, okay, I can help you. And it was based on foreclosed properties. That didn't exist. The only way you could get information on foreclosed properties was you literally had to go down to the county recorder's office and then look in microfiche and search for notice of defaults and pay $1 a page to have them printed, or you had to establish a relationship with the title company, First American Title, Fidelity Title, Ticor Title, Texas Title, depending on where you live. Fidelity controls 52% of the title market, just for a fact there. So anyway, I was going to charge them $80,000 because now I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not employed, I have no job. This could be, I could hire some data dinks to do $20,000 worth of coding, and bam, we've got this like foreclosure tracking, like high speed, low drag, in the cloud software type thing. So McCabe says, I think I can get it done for less. And I said, you're probably right. He says, what can I get it done for? I said, 10 to 20 grand. I was honest with him. He said, why don't you come work for me and I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about distressed property. Now, there's a lot of facets to distressed property. The purpose of this, we'll talk about surplus proceeds, which is a very esoteric, secret little market. I've been doing it for 21 years, okay? It's a cash cow, and not many people know how to do this. But back to Doug McCabe. So I was doing back then wholesaling. A lot of people, you'll see coaches, you'll see programs. We'll show you how to wholesale. Look, I'm in the game with Pace Morby, Sub 2, Owners Club, Gator, if you guys have seen that one too. There's some Sub 2 people here. I've been on podcast or Zooms with Pace, and I'm supposed to go on his YouTube channel in the next few weeks, I guess, to talk about a recent transaction I did. Because I built a house for 800 grand, sold it for $1,350,000, carried the paper, and because of penalties, interest, I ended up getting like $3.3 million out of that house, okay? But it was painful, and I'll get into that. Because I had all of my liquid capital tied up in that build, and it was supposed to be just a 1-month payoff. I've got debt, I've got creditors, the whole 9 yards, and I was able to weather the storm because I have multiple streams of income, multiple businesses. So this is what I've done. Bachelor's degree. I've had some hiccups. I haven't been a good citizen. I've been to prison 2 times, okay? I got my college degree in prison within 15 months. And when I got out of prison, I went and got my master's of business. I got my MBA, finished that, then went to law school, then got my master's of law. I was working for a law firm when I got out of prison. I was actually working for my old attorney as a paralegal while I was going to law school. And coming out of prison, I'm unemployable, except attorneys will hire you if you have the skills. But previously to that, I'd been doing surplus proceeds, and Steve Yarmy was my surplus proceeds attorney. We did $10 million worth of transactions in about a 1.5 year period. And initially we used to do it, we would go, well, first of all, what is surplus proceeds? Surplus proceeds, here, this is what happens when you have alcohol addictions. You pass out on the toilet and somebody takes a picture. Surplus proceeds is when somebody's losing their house, they're in foreclosure, or what they call pre-foreclosure. They owe, let's say, $100,000 to the bank. We'll just call it the bank or mortgage servicing company. When the house goes to auction, and if anything is bid above and beyond, they can call it surplus proceeds, excess funds, or an overbid. You'll hear of different terms, okay? The homeowner's entitled to the money, but unless you're in California, most other states, after you lose your house, you're probably gonna be on the street homeless unless you've got some resources to support in 2 weeks to 30 days. You're typically not looking at legal mail coming in because lawyers have been sending you stuff for like the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months now, and your head's in the sand. So even if you did get a letter from what they call the trustee in the foreclosure process, it's just gonna say, hey, Mr. Smith, you may be entitled to claim surplus proceeds. They don't tell you how much, okay? Please call us and we'll get you a claim form. Well, that mail probably went to the trash can. That's what happens most time. And then usually in 30 days to 60 days or slower, like Texas has got some weird laws, you'll be out on the street in a couple of days, maybe a week. Nevada, it's about 2 weeks to 30 days where I live. California, 6 months, 9 months, a year. They can play the game, probably 2 years, file bankruptcy a few times, you ain't getting them out. But even then, they're still not gonna know they have surplus because they threw that piece of mail in the trash. So that's what surplus proceeds is, the excess of what was owed to the bank to what a third-party investor bought the property for. Now, if the property goes back to the bank, they call it third-party benefit. When the property's auctioned, it can do two things. It goes back to the beneficiary, which is the bank, or it sells third-party to an investor. If it goes back to the beneficiary, that means there's no surplus. Okay, there's no surplus proceeds if the bank takes it back. Banks have a right to open up the bid at lower than what they're owed. And that's a very common thing right now in a lot of jurisdictions, because if you're in, the Treasure Coast of Florida, that's Austin, Texas, property values are sinking. They're dropping 10, 15, 20%. They're making the market correction. You're in California, everyone's got equity. In Las Vegas, everybody's got equity. Arizona, everybody's got equity. Certain parts of Texas, people got equity. Florida, people got equity. So now foreclosures are up right now 32% from last year. In my own local market in Las Vegas, foreclosures are double the month of August from when they were in July. Double. Okay, that number is probably going to double for September. Why? Tourism's down. Bartenders are not getting tipped. Tourism's down 30%. That means there's probably down 30% on tips. And people in Vegas live on leverage and they live to a certain lifestyle. But that's kind of common in America. Okay. Excuse me. The opportunity in surplus is there's about 3,100 to 3,300 counties and parishes and townships throughout the United States. On the West Coast, there's a foreclosure auction every day. In Texas, they're the first Tuesday of the month in all counties in Texas. The data is very skewed. It's hard to find data to tell you when that auction is. I mean, you can get it from the title company, but it might be 2 or 3 weeks too late, right? In Pace's group, in sub 2, there's 18,000 people. There might be, 1,000 people in Dallas all chasing the same property. No one's doing surplus proceeds. There's one guy in Texas doing surplus proceeds. I talked to him yesterday, but he's doing it a different way. He's doing it to where he gets a percentage of the surplus for telling him about it. The problem with that is you don't have an enforceable contract. Why? You didn't pay consideration. So contracts require consideration to make them enforceable. If I just give you a contract to say, hey, pay me 15%, and I'll use my attorney to get your surplus, if they want to cancel that, they can. There's no recourse because the courts won't uphold it. With surplus, when we buy the claim, $100,000 claim, I typically pay 20 cents on the dollar for 100 grand. Why will they take 20 cents on the dollar for 100 grand? Most people think you're crazy for giving them money because they just lost their house. Okay? They think you're absolutely nuts. Like, I just lost my house. What do you mean I have money coming back to me? Well, that's the law. The surplus is an equitable claim that the homeowner, the last recorded record owner, is entitled to the surplus. And there's a whole nother market of chasing pre-foreclosed property, getting a deed, paying the guy $5,000, $10,000 for the deed, and just let that property go to auction. Because the hedge funds today are your largest buyers of foreclosed property. Guys like me and you and this group, we cannot compete with the hedge funds at the auction because we don't have an unlimited source of funds. We don't have billions of dollars or hundreds of millions. I could go buy 1 or 2 houses a month at the auction, but it's heavy capital and the payoff is low because they're going to bid up the property. Hedge funds bid up the property to about 95 cents of fair market value. You can't make money as an investor unless they're trying to make 4% every quarter on the money. So 4 quarters, they're making 16%. That's their business model. That's how hedge funds work in the foreclosure game. Small guys like us, we just can't compete. So in 2004 is when I had the epiphany of chasing surplus proceeds. I couldn't compete on the auction market anymore because hundreds of people, because of these infomercials, were showing up the auction and joining coaching programs. So prior to that, like 2001, 2002, there was maybe 5 or 6 of us showing up at the auction. And then you can do collusion. I would show up with fake cashier's checks. I'd color copy them when their Kinko's was around before FedEx bought them. And I would register the bid. I would never pay for it, but I'd register the bid. Then I'd have this other investor say, hey man, pay me $2,000 and I won't bid. They'd give me $2,000, or they'd give 5 of us $2,000 a piece to not bid on that property. Now, if there was another one, sometimes I'd make $10,000 every other day just showing up to the auction with fake cashier's checks, registering the bid just to get paid off. Ingenious idea. Now, I think in Stockton, Modesto County, the feds came in some years ago. They indicted a bunch of guys for collusion, and guess what happened? Not guilty. That's not considered collusion. The collusion is when you're colluding with the bank itself, not with other people or other bidders. So it was an interesting thing. I was kind of doing that a couple years, but it's another way to make money without money, right? So instead of competing with the investors at the foreclosure market, what I did was started chasing the surplus. And initially I would just take a percentage. And then a couple times the trustees released, even though we had contracts, they would release the money directly to the homeowner, and the homeowner wouldn't pay us our 30% or 10% fee that we were trying to get. So I went to my attorneys at the time. It was a big law firm called Miles Bauer Bergstrom. They're no longer around anymore because the attorneys are all retired. I said, look, we just lost this court case. How can I keep doing this? And so they came up with the idea that I would buy the rights to the claim because it's an equitable right. And then from then on, we had a couple trustees challenge us in court. We won the case, and they never messed with us again. And so that brings me what is today in surplus is buying the rights to the claim. You can even buy the rights to a tax foreclosure. So people that don't pay property taxes, it goes to a tax foreclosure. The problem with the tax foreclosure is it takes anywhere from 1 to 3 years to get the money released from the court, the clerk of the court. It has to go through this whole litigation process. So to me, that's not the best use of the money trying to buy the claim when you got 3 years, like your return just like diminishes. In the surplus game that I do, it's typically between 60 to 120 days, the money's coming out. In some cases, if there's no competing claims like a junior lien holder, a judgment, it have to be a recorded lien holder gets paid. If it's just a clean, straight foreclosure, just first trust deed, one mortgage, with the right paperwork, the right attorney, the trustee will just release the money straight over to your attorney. So it could take less than 30 days. I've had that happen. Multiple businesses. I have my tax firm. I have a home services business called One Day Doors and Closets. You might have seen that. It's a big dealership thing. We just do interior doors and closet systems. Surplus with Chris, Synthesis Advisors. I do fractional CFO work. And then LV Opportunity Zone LLC is my real estate holding company. Because I'm still active. I buy real estate to hold. I don't sell anything that I buy. With surplus proceeds, I'll give you a story. The biggest claim I ever did was $353,000. I paid the guy $83,000 for $353,000. I didn't have the money to pay him his claim. So I knew a friend of mine was a Cornell attorney, and he was raising all the money in Las Vegas to build all these new developments in like 2004, 5, and 6, kind of before the crash, right? If anybody remembers the crash from then. So he raised $10 million of fund to go buy surplus for what I was doing this in Nevada and Arizona. I said, hey, Wayne, his name is Wayne Boatwright. I've got this claim. I don't have the money to fund it, but what would you guys pay me to assign this claim to you? That was the first time in my life I ever made a 6-figure check without using my own money. They gave me $100,000. Now then, this was like 2005, that changed my life at that time, right? And then we were doing probably 2 to 3 claims a day, about 10 a week, because that was kind of the foreclosure auction and where it was at that point in time. And so that $10 million they had in their fund, they would pay us, me and my partner at the time, another Marine, they would pay us to assign the claims to their fund. So we were making our money instantly, and then they would deal with the litigation and everything else, and we would just go get more claims and more claims. We were at the auction every day. By the time the auction was over, we would then go knock on that person's door. So the critical piece here is what I can try to give you as a takeaway is showing up at the auction. It takes action. Everybody that's here took action to come learn about something on how to make money. So thank you for showing up. It takes a little bit of grit. I mean, you'll be surprised with dealing people with mental health issues, especially foreclosure. It's duress, traumatic, they're losing the house, they might have emotional attachments or whatever they got going. But when you're offering money, sometimes they won't take it. They just say, I don't care. You're like, wait a minute, but you're going to get this money at some point, and if you don't get it, the government's going to take it after 3 years. And that's called S-cheat. So I will probably say 95% of the time, I've never had anybody say no. Sometimes they want to negotiate of what they can get paid. Like, hey, there's a $100,000 claim, you're only going to give me 20. Well, I got about $20,000 in legal costs, and we don't know if you owe other creditors money, so we got to consider that. So it's a negotiation. So sometimes I said, if you want more money, I can give you this today, and then when we get the money from the claim, we'll give you more later. That's another tactic I use. But most of the time, people just are happy to get their 10 or 20,000 bucks, sometimes 25, 30, and they move on their way. I've never gone more than 50% of the value of the claim if the title on the property was clean. The traps we've ran into before that weren't necessarily available to see on title is when somebody owes child support or some sort of domestic support. Because what the clerk of the courts do, or at least in my jurisdiction, is when they send out notices for people to make claims against the money, they always send one to whatever the district attorney for the child support section. If that comes back that they owe, oh my, they get paid first. So bankruptcy, for instance, when somebody files bankruptcy, the first priority to get paid is domestic support. So that in-law, child support, alimony, palimony gets paid before even before the IRS. And you would think the government gets paid first, but in this case, Congress protected families, like children and ex-spouses. With what we have now is foreclosures are on the rise, okay? And they're probably going to be on the rise for the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to go through a correction in the real estate market. We're already starting to see it. Until interest rates change, buyers' behavior is not going to change. Right now, property's sitting, people are buying houses, but when you buy a house, you got to make your money when you buy. You should buy a house and walk into some equity. You don't want to buy a house today, and 6 months later, it's worth 10% less. But in general, if you buy a house today and just wait it out, weather the storm for 10 years, your house will typically double in value every 10 years. That's historical. So, like, I bought a house 6 years ago. It was upside down. It was like $30,000 upside down in 2019. Now we're in 2025. The house is worth $750,000. Okay, and that's even after this little market correction in Las Vegas. But I kept that low interest rate, sub 2, just took over the payments, put a renter in there. I don't really make any money on the house. It pays for itself, but that's okay. Back to surplus claims. There's 3,000, like I was saying, the counties. So the market's wide with very low competition. And so working with me, what I'm trying to offer is I want to build a community that we can collaborate. The more collaboration, we all make money together. But you can use my money. I will teach you how to do surplus proceeds, how to look for the data. There's a couple little databases, how to go to the auction, pay attention. And usually there's somebody at every auction, every county that charges like $100 a month. And they're like, I'll call them, they're the scribes. They record all the data. They up to date the postponements of the foreclosure, bankruptcy, and you just buy that sheet from them. They'll usually give it to you like an Excel sheet, or they'll have some sort of website to go to. But in my experience, there's one of those people in every county. Now, if it's a rural county where there's not a big population, there's not a single person that's going to really look for that data because there's really no market. Rural parts of Idaho, you might see 1 or 2 foreclosures every couple of months, and it's probably mostly on land or some small cabin or something that's over leveraged or a mobile home. So how many of you guys would be interested in surplus proceeds? It's quite a few of you, okay? Because this is real. You buy money at a discount. I mean, like, you've seen the J.G. Wentworth commercials before? Anybody seen those? You know, I buy annuities for a discount, lottery winnings. It's almost no different. You're just buying money at a discount. Like I've said before, why do people need your money? They need your help because they're broke. Their car probably just got repoed too. So giving them money from their surplus and advance on it today changes their life. They can afford first, last, and deposit, because today in most apartment, I don't know what, I mean, in Las Vegas, if you're trying to get a one-bedroom apartment in a decent area, like you're coming out of pocket like $6,000 just for first, last, and deposit. Now, if you're in California, it's probably way more than that. Certain parts of Dallas, Texas. So, I mean, the cost and barriers to entry just for suitable housing is high, very high. And so being kind of the hero in the surplus proceeds market, not only are you going to change their life and let them move on with their life, but you're going to also be able to make money at the same time. And you don't have to use your own money. You can use my money. Now, what I'd hope to see is you get in this business, and you can do this part-time. It's not like a full-time gig. It could be, but you can start using your own money, because I want to see you all make money. I want to see you buy a claim, a $100,000 claim for $20,000 and make 80, minus your legal cost. Legal costs, what does it cost? Legal costs for an attorney to handle this go from anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000. What I do is I just pay them a flat fee, okay? And generally, you don't have to pay them up front. Does anybody know why you would not have to pay a lawyer a retainer for a surplus proceeds matter? Anybody? Any legal beagles in here? No? Because the money's already sitting with the clerk of the court. Attorneys get priority. They get to make a claim first. That's why they won't take a retainer. So in the past, I just say, you'll collect it. When the court releases, that's when you get paid. And most every attorney I've worked with is like, fine, cool. Now, the trustee, that's the foreclosing trustee for a deed of trust, they get paid fees to do the foreclosure. Then if there's surplus, what they try to do is they try to collect another $3,000 to $10,000 for filing what they call a complaint for interpleader. What a complaint for interpleader means is, hey, we foreclose on this property, we have no rights to the money, and we don't care who gets the money. Therefore, we're going to interplead it to the clerk of the court and let whoever wants to make a claim duke it out. In the meantime, we're going to take our $10,000 from that surplus because we had to file this like 4-page complaint. So when I see other law firms trying to take like $7,000, $10,000 for just a form pleading, I go into the court and I go, Judge, no. There's maybe at best 5 hours to 10 hours worth of work in this thing. And usually the court agrees and they'll say, sorry, you can't take more than $3,500. Okay, because when we're in the surplus game, if that trustee charges us 10, that's money out of our pockets. Okay? Now, I've had the longest surplus proceeds case I've been in litigation on took 9 months. And the only reason why it took 9 months is because there was some junior lien creditors. No matter how many notices the court would send out, the attorneys would send out, they would not respond of how much they were owed. So we eventually had to file a motion to say, Judge, come on. They can't continue to put their heads in the sand as a creditor and claim they're owed interest beyond the interpleader date. And we got the judge to agree that the funds that we think they're owed will still sit in the court, but you have to release the remaining amounts to us, and you can't hold us up. Now, in Florida, they've had some crafty attorneys convince the court to not pay those junior lien creditors anything because they didn't make a claim by a certain date. The Florida Supreme Court has overturned those rulings, saying, no, they're entitled to their money. You can't not pay them. But at this point, once the court gave the money to the homeowner, in those cases, they already spent the money, so they weren't getting the money back. But there's precedent for this now. And in some places like South Carolina, which is very odd, I don't think anybody's taken this thing to the Supreme Court of South Carolina yet. South Carolina seems to have a rule where when the court sets out a claims process, they say you have 30 days to make a claim. If you don't, you lose the money. In a court of equity, that seems very, very odd because typically the states do not get what they call escheat the money for 3 years. It has to sit in an account or with the clerk of the court before the state puts it in its general fund if nobody's made a claim to it. So 30 days seems like a very short period. If it's me and if we pick up a claim in South Carolina, I'm taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. I'll fight it all the way. And I might do it like on a low budget claim, like 10 grand, because the government's not going to want to spend a lot of money on such a low value claim, so they might just let it slide and let the Supreme Court rule. At least that's my theory. Does anybody have any questions on anything? Hands? That bright light, I can't see it, anything back there. Okay. How do we learn more? I'm going to have a breakout session where I'm going to at least give you enough information to try to go get your first surplus proceeds claim without me. So that's going to be in a breakout session from 4 to 4:30 in that room that's straight out that way. I have 30 more minutes up here, and I think I've pretty much covered a lot of ground, and it's going to be a lot of confusing. Working with me, you're going to get more value out of me, kind of like Pace Morby. I do a lot of crazy real estate stuff that people would say that is crazy. Like I buy property that they owe $5 million on, and it's really only worth like 500 grand, right? And I'll put that thing in bankruptcy, what they call a Chapter 11, and I'll get rid of all the junior lien holders, and I'll end up with that property for 500 grand. Sometimes I buy those properties, put them in bankruptcy, $5 million in debt, $4 million in debt. I contest the liability of the claims, and even though the bank's going to foreclose, there's a thing called contested liability doctrine. It's some case law, and what that allows me to do is preserve the basis. You guys know what basis is? When you buy an asset, it has basis. Okay, this is important for taxes. When you have depreciable assets and you're going to do a depreciation schedule and you have basis, that's what offsets your taxable incomes, whether you're a W-2 guy or you're a business owner. Depreciation is your friend, expenses are not. Okay, so when we contest liability, I make a decent amount of money. I'm not a super wealthy guy, ultra rich or anything like that, but I do 7 figures, okay, which is plenty for me and my family. Will I do more? Yes, I'm getting older, I'm bound to make more money. So if it's a $5 million property, bank forecloses, I contest the liability, and let's say their foreclosure was $500,000. So the trustee's deed would record for 500 grand. That would give me a $4.5 million loss on my taxes. That means I'm not paying taxes for 4, 5, or 6 years, okay? So that's a paper loss. I didn't come out of pocket the money, it's a paper loss. So with people that work with me, I go through the whole tax planning with you, LLC, entity setups, so you have a tax efficient entity, so when you make money, you pay the least amount of taxes, right? People pay me $20,000 a year as their advisor, right? My clients that make $10, $12 million a year, instead of paying $1.7 million, $2 million in taxes on their net income, we're usually doing tax strategies of like $500,000 to eliminate the rest of the taxes, okay? So bankruptcy, I was talking to some other guys out here, Nate and Nate, they're both Marines as well. And thank you for you guys that have been in this, served in any branch, thank you for your service and your LEOs that are out there. It's a shitty job in the political climate these days, but thank you. There's also hacks you can do with bankruptcy trustees. Okay, so when houses go to foreclosure, homeowners will do a few things. They're going to sell it, do nothing, or they're going to file bankruptcy. Okay, a lot of times they'll file bankruptcy as kind of a preemptive measure to buy like 4, 5, 6, 7 more months time in the house, even though they can't afford it. So they'll file like a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, that will delay the foreclosure auction. And when you're chasing surplus proceeds, you have to follow these foreclosures or the process with them, because once they come out of bankruptcy, they hit the auction block, okay? And so if they file Chapter 7, you can actually go buy that property from the Chapter 7 trustee subject to the existing debt by typically paying the Chapter 7 trustee $5,000. Where does the $5,000 go? $3,000 of it is going to go to the Chapter 7 trustee's attorney to file the motion to sell the property to you. And the other $2,000 is going to go to the bankruptcy estate to be distributed to creditors that make a claim. Now you have a trustee's deed from the bankruptcy court. You're now a successor in interest. You can either keep that property, bring the loan current, and leverage it that way, or you can turn around and rent that property, pocket the cash until the bank forecloses 4 or 5 years from now. Typically, when properties go into bankruptcy, the servicing departments of the lenders or the servicers, they forget about them. They do. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But in general, I'll give a story. A friend of mine, the last payment he made, he's a pilot for the airlines, and he quit making payments on his house back in 2011. He still lives in that house. I put him in bankruptcy 2 times. And the bank continues to forget about re-foreclosing on that property. Okay? That's what happens. It's a game. That's all it is. Once you learn the law in a lot of aspects, you got to use it to your leverage to win the game. And banks do the same thing. So you can do the rental hack, $5,000, $2,000, $3,000. It's whatever you offer the trustee. Most of the time they're going to sell the property to you because nobody else, they either have to abandon the property, let the bank take a motion for relief, or take the few $1,000s that they can put in their pocket. Bankruptcy trustees per bankruptcy, if there's no assets to administer in a bankruptcy case, only make $60 per case, $60. So when you're coming with a $5,000 offer to buy that one property, or 2 or 3, they're making a few $1,000s now. Bankruptcy trustees have a lot of assets to sell. It could be cars, houses, retirement funds. No, those are protected. But anything that comes into the bankruptcy estate that does not have a state exemption or federal exemption is open season to buy. The cool thing is there's not really many people playing the field in the bankruptcy game. I know one guy in Vegas, he bought 40 houses from the Chapter 7 trustee, all these different bankruptcy cases over the course of like 6 months, and the bank forgot about him for 6 years. So for a $200,000 investment, he made $2.4 million renting them out because you have no personal liability on the debt that's in front of you. And then guess what happened when they started to foreclose? He put those 40 properties in a bankruptcy called Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and he kept them all and crammed down the debt. And he probably, I don't know if he sold them or whatever, but this was like 10 years ago. And so that's what's the interesting thing from pre-foreclosure, surplus proceeds, and bankruptcy. Working with me, you're going to learn a lot of these things. Okay? Now, another thing is IRS liens. Anybody ever seen those on property? The IRS very rarely enforces its liens. And when you have liens on property that need to get paid and they're not trying to enforce them, don't wake up the dragon. You don't need to tell them. I buy properties like that because I rent them out and I pay nobody because I'm not responsible on the debt. And so there's a property I'm looking at in Austin currently. There's $5.5, $6 million of IRS's first position for $2.5 to $3 million. And there's a bunch of judgments. The guy that used to own the property died a couple years ago, so his father's kind of administering the estate, the probate. But business property never gets probated, especially if it's over leveraged. So I'm still trying to negotiate with the guy. I offered him 20 grand, 50 grand, even 100, and he said no. And I'm like, if I give you 100 grand, like you can't even guarantee me clear title because of all these liens. The hack with that one is I could rent that property out for $30,000 a month. So I'm going to get my money back in 4 months. Now I'm probably going to go pay this guy. I'm going to wait a couple months because he says, well, I'm going to try to get rid of some of these liens. There's no mortgage on this property. It's just IRS and judgments. When you see judgments on property and they've been stale for a couple years, anybody ever sued anybody and got a judgment? All right, nobody's a litigator in here. All right. When you sue somebody and get a judgment, small claims court, district court, superior court, whatever jurisdiction you're in, you get this thing called a judgment. When you record it, that says I'm entitled to get paid, but you don't always get paid. You gotta go get the money. Even in the surplus proceeds, when you see judgments, there's an opportunity to make money on the judgment. You get a hold of the judgment holder and you say, what would you sell your judgment for me? So you can buy judgments. I've done it before, 5 and 10 cents on the dollar, okay? So when you do things like that in surplus proceeds, you're creating a bigger gap, more profit for yourself by negotiating those judgments. Because a lot of times judgments are recorded in a person's name, not against the property. They attach to the property, but they're just in the person's name. So a lot of times judgment holders don't even know that the person even owned property, okay? So you call them up and you say, my spiel is typically this: hey, this guy owes me money too. I'm trying to put him in bankruptcy. Would you sell me your judgment so I can leverage my claim? I'm really pissed at this guy. It's just all hot air. I know I got a surplus claim. If the guy sells me his $5,000 judgment for $500, I just put $4,500 more in my pocket, right? So even with the IRS will lift liens with support, right? I can get an IRS lien lifted off a specific property if I show them an appraisal and show them that the homeowner is getting no money. They'll release the lien from a specific property, but not against the person. So there's a lot of little tips, tricks, and things in surplus with judgments, junior lien holders. A lot of institutional debt, it's too hard to get a hold of somebody. If it's owed to like a Capital One bank, a judgment, I mean, you can get a hold of the attorney, but the bureaucracy to get those like judgments for credit cards settled when they've been recorded or there's a court case is very difficult. I don't even waste my time with stuff like that. So, all right, folks, Chris Craig, Surplus with Chris.